Welcome to the Boss It Weekly podcast, a no-nonsense, no-hype, frank and close-up analysis of what is currently working and what is not in the world of software. The Boss It podcast is packed with major takeaways for software business owners and managers. So, let's begin.
And away we go. Another Boss It podcast and another guest for you. Well, this time it's actually going to be a little bit linked to a guest that I had on a few weeks ago. I don't know how many of you heard that particular one, but I was talking to Simon Gross from Foundation SP. And he was looking at that from the perspective of the software service and the software platform that he had, which was working with the employees. This week I've got with me Jackie Handy. And, well, Jackie does many things. She is a consultant. She's a speaker. Well, it's good that she's a speaker because I found mime artists on podcasts don't go down so well. So that's an interesting bit. She's a trainer, and it's about helping organisations to be more empathetic, to have inclusion, to help develop those people, and to improve communication. Hello, Jackie, and welcome.
Hi, Mark. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the intro.
Was my intro correct?
I'm not a very good mime artist, so yeah, you're right there.
Yes, that would be difficult, wouldn't it? And here's Jackie, and she's going to do 25 minutes of mime.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can do the rabbit in the shadows, this sort of shadow miming, but it's not really helpful on the podcast.
Well, if we get stuck, I'll ask you to bring that in towards the end.
Okay, and just sort of talk you through what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Was that a fair introduction of what you do?
Yeah, it was actually. I mean, you're right. I sort of, funnily enough, my career is quite diverse as well, and it works through various themes. I mean, I spent 20 years working in recruitment and in leadership as well within that sort of field. So there was sort of a natural progression, not just from my professional life, but also from my personal background and my personal life experiences, right, which, as we all know, kind of shape us and shape our journey. And I found, a few years ago, a way to really merge those two things. And so, yes, I now work with organisations, leadership teams to develop them in various areas with a specific area of concentration in terms of diversity and inclusion, which of course is super important right now. It's getting a lot of press, I suppose, with certainly recent world events, but it's always been an important factor. I think it's just moving a little bit up the corporate agenda right now, which I think is a really good thing. So yeah, it was a great introduction. Thank you, Mark.
So your consultancy company is called Runway Global?
That's right, Runway Global Limited. Yeah.
Based in the UK?
That's correct, yeah. I do work with organisations internationally. I speak at international conferences, but yes, I'm based in the UK.
So tell us about diversity inclusion. What does that mean? What is it that you're doing? And ultimately, what are the benefits to the organisations that you're working with, and even more important, to the employees within those organisations?
Yeah, great. And I'm glad you added that bit at the end, because that's so, so important. And, I think what happens a lot of the time is when people talk about diversity and inclusion, they immediately go to the statistics and we talk about, the fact that if you have a more diverse organisation, then you'll have more innovation and creativity, which is true. But some of these things are quite well known. I think the important things to really think about when we look at diversity is it's not just about people's physical characteristics. It might be about their cultural diversity. It might be about their neurological diversity. So, just simply the way in which people think, process and respond differently. That too is a form of diversity. And so diversity has a whole spectrum really to consider. It's not just about, the colour of your skin, your gender, your sexual orientation, your disabilities. There's so much more to it. And of course, in terms of diversity and legalities. These are the things that are often focused on, to make sure that an organisation, wherever they are in the world, are not discriminating. But actually, I believe that we should be looking differently at this as organisations, because so often diversity and inclusion, by the way, is simply belonging and kind of hearing every voice and valuing every contribution. That's how I would sort of sum it up. But I think what often happens is a diversity and inclusion, quote unquote, project gets underway as if it's something that can be fixed in a period of time. And almost immediately, we default to looking at discrimination, considering where our unconscious or even conscious biases sit. And it often presents a very negative landscape to start from. And that can be quite off-putting, because the whole topic is rather reflective, really, and we have to do some honest reflection in order to be able to springboard from that and move forward in our businesses. But I think that really, if we can start to look at the more positive sides to diversity and inclusion, and as you rightly mentioned, talking about some of the benefits and the fact that actually you as an organisation are much more likely to attract, retain, engage the people already within your workforce and the talent that you're looking for externally, you're much more likely to have deeper levels of rapport, communication and business collaboration with your external stakeholders, because you are looking to, I suppose, another quote unquote, speak the same language and behave in such a way that you truly look to value everybody's input.
Do you not think that everybody discriminates in one way or another?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. And, that is a really good start point, is to simply say, I have biases, because every single person has biases. And we are all a product, if you like, of our experience, of our upbringing, of our gender, of our race and our ethnicity. We all become a product. And so quite naturally what we do as human beings is we gravitate towards those who are like us.
Yes.
And there was a really great program on UK TV a couple of weeks ago, and it was called, I don't know if you saw it, Mark, but it was called The School That Tried to End Racism, and very much kind of prompted, I think, from the recent world events. And they basically got a team of, or a small class of volunteers of 11-year-olds, and they started looking at the biases that they had. And by the way, they were of varying ethnicities.
Yes.
And they started really approaching that. And the reason that they approached it with children at that age is that there was the thinking that certainly up until the age of around about 11, we don't really recognise that there are differences in people. Yeah, we do see the differences, of course, but we don't recognise the differences in with negative labelling, if you like. And so the theory behind that exercise was to see whether tackling any kind of biases and what made us different, and understanding more about the cultural and historical identity of the people around us, whether that could help minimise or even eliminate unconscious biases. And it was a very interesting program. I mean, that was very much one side of the coin, if you like, and of course we're not dealing with children in as far as this podcast. This is about business, but I guess what it highlights is that as we grow and develop, we do naturally form silos, and we have, whether consciously or otherwise, in crowds and out crowds, and that influences how we make decisions, how we communicate, and the people to whom we trust. And that makes a whole difference in business as well as in life generally.
Yes, I've got a theory actually I'd like to try out on you to see what you think. I've not really voiced this before. Is
Okay.
that I think that I don't like to talk about racism because I think it's more to do with discrimination. I think that there is a lot of discrimination, and as you're saying, it's not always registered by that person that they are discriminating. They're not always consciously aware, but I
Yeah.
think that there is a part of us, and it may go back deep into our ancestry, sort of a primeval drive that primitive man, if you like, probably, well, it did. They survived because they came together as tribes and they looked alike and they behaved in a like way because it was a very dangerous place.
Yeah.
And I think that perhaps when people are under pressure, there is almost that sort of primeval thing. One, you can probably communicate with people more easily that are like you, but there's also a sort of a safety mechanism. There's a fear issue there that is really quite deep down in our sort of primeval instinctive survival mechanism that's driving this.
I think there's an element of that. I think of course we're not, well, we are tribal, but we're not primitive, I guess, anymore. We'd like to
No,
think not.
but we're still driven by primitive instincts.
But we are, absolutely. And I think the difference in the world now is that we have so much accessibility, to diversity. And, we are, I would challenge anybody that's listening, actually, that would say to me that, is there not some form of diversity in your organisation? And why is that the case? Is that the case because you feel that you should have diversity in your organisation, and although you're not sure how you feel about it, naturally you feel that there's a sort of social responsibility, if you like, a corporate responsibility to have a level of diversity. And I mean, diversity is really just simply difference. And you're right, Mark. I think there are some very primitive installations within us, if you like, that kind of look for familiarity. And this is where unconscious bias comes from, because our brains are hardwired to work very fast, and we like to work fast, and we like to be right. And so therefore, by gravitating to similarity, we then typically group people and we categorize experiences, people, things, because it just makes that decision making then much quicker. And our brains, because we like to feel right, feels good. It feels good to make a decision quickly. It feels good to feel right. And so what tends to happen is, rather than look for an alternative, we, in the heat of the moment, the high pressure that we work with, in the strict deadlines that we're often subject to, we go to and we even call them go-to people, and those people generally will fit a certain criteria, whether that's how they look or whatever, but that is the criteria that we somehow inherently trust. And that's actually, when we think about it, although it may feel good at the time, it's extremely limiting, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. I mean, the idea that we want to make quick decisions, and there are good reasons for wanting to make quick decisions.
Of course.
Part of it was our survival. We needed to be able to make a quick decision because it could be, generations ago, the difference between life and death. Nowadays, it's not quite the same, but I suppose there is also this sort of thinking that very successful business people tend to be ones who can make decisions quite quickly and not deliberate forever, because we live in a fast-moving world.
Sure.
So there are lots of reasons here why that fast decision-making is not all negative, but there is going to be a negative aspect to this, because it's about drawing to conclusions when you're looking at people. And we do. I mean, a lot of scientific tests have been done that we start to draw a conclusion about a person within seconds of meeting them.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's why we talk about first impressions being so important, isn't it?
Yes.
Because, and that is exactly, what I've explained there about the brain that kind of has these almost categories installed within it that just kind of immediately would look at somebody and go, right, okay, which category are you in? And of course, we don't do this consciously. We just naturally categorize and compartmentalize people, and that leads us to make judgments. And that can be anything from, yes, how a person looks, maybe an accent if we're talking on a, podcast or something like this,
Yes.
or indeed, what they might be wearing, so many different things. And what we're doing is we're comparing them to our own unique version of good and bad. That's what we're doing, or right and wrong. And so it becomes then very difficult to be challenged, regardless of how positive that challenge is intended, to say, well, what makes that particular thing or characteristic right or wrong? And of course, what often happens is we feel somehow cornered because we feel like our own judgment is being questioned. And so then we typically move to defense, really, to say, well, it just is, it's almost like when your child says to you, but why, and they constantly do. And eventually you're just like, because it just is. And that's it. And I think those kind of things, are the same principles, because when we start talking about the whole spectrum of diversity and inclusion, and you've probably heard about implicit association tests, for instance, that Harvard
Yes.
kind of created. We naturally, depending on our own experiences in life, we will naturally gravitate. And of course, we know that. Again, I don't want to keep using the race side of things either. But let's talk about gender instead, just as another characteristic.
Yes.
It may be that if you would look at business leaders and male, you might see that as good, and business leaders and female less good, but maybe secretaries as female, that might seem good, because these are sort of gradual stereotypes, really, that are systemic, and so these have been part of our culture, our life, our business worlds for so long that somehow then taking that time, as you've already mentioned, Mark, we very often don't have the benefit of a lot of time, but to take that time to truly reflect and say, well, why is it that all the secretaries are female, for instance, and all our business leaders are male? Why is that? And what is that? Is that good? Is that bad? Is that just the way we are? And could we challenge that? And what difference might it make to our organization if we did?
Well,
and that's really a good start point.
yeah, I think, you make some very good points there. I'm going to touch upon a subject. I don't know how far you want to follow me on this one, because I know a lot of people are very sensitive about this, particularly at the moment, which is BLM, Black Lives Matters.
Yeah.
And I think without any argument at all, of course, that is really all lives matter. Every life matters. I have a slight concern with it. And it's quite a difficult one to explain, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
In the business world, it's known and it's been recorded that senior business executives are taller, and that's something that's been tracked over many decades.
Yeah.
And there's many explanations to that.
Yeah.
Now, if my son was born short, I wouldn't be talking to him about the fact that he's going to be discriminated upon because he's short, and you're probably not going to make it, son, as a business leader. Because it starts him off with a very negative outlook. It's almost like putting an anchor around his neck. I recently saw a very good video, which was a number of well-known black celebrities and leaders talking about the Black Lives Matters. And their issue with it was that it potentially does do exactly that. So a whole generation of black men and women it sort of starts them off thinking that they're not going to make it. And ultimately, the success in your life is self-determinating. And
Yeah.
they're saying, stop talking. I think it was Morgan Freeman, and he was being interviewed, and he just said to this guy, stop talking about it. He said, you're drawing more attention to it. He said, there has been discrimination, but we've got to get past that now. And I think that's true. You could end up giving black people with great talents, almost it's like putting, it's giving them a handicap to start from, because positive attitude can have such an effect, and you will come across discrimination. Everybody will. You would have done because you are a woman. I would have done because of where I came from, or an education that wasn't right for that situation. And there has been tremendous discrimination against black people, but it happens to all of us. But if you have that as you're wearing like this heavy suit of armor that just slows you down.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of black people now that are standing up and saying, hang on a minute, don't handicap these people before they've even started.
Okay, so you asked me how much I wanted to go alongside.
Yes, probably not at all.
But actually, I think you make some very interesting points, Mark, and I want to pick up on a couple of them. And the first one is that you said BLM, Black Lives Matter, and of course all lives matter, and I think it's really important. I mean, I'm a white woman, but I've been I'm very aware of racism, systemic racism, privilege, fragility, and lots of words that are starting to become more commonplace in terms of this discussion. So I remember, actually, just a few weeks ago, that when the Black Lives Matter campaign was particularly, up there, if you like, and you'd got everybody was putting hashtag Black Lives Matter, people were putting black screens on and whatever, and it was all for very positive intention and all the rest of it. Oh yes,
absolutely, I agree with that.
Sure. And then what was happening a lot of the time is people were saying, well, hang on a minute, Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter, and we are creating segregation just by doing that. Now, and I wasn't sure about it to begin with. And I thought, well, there must be a reason. So I'm going to check out what that reason is. And I saw a great cartoon that actually summed it up so beautifully. And the cartoon was that there were two people, and one of they were outside their houses, and one house was on fire and one house wasn't. And the one said, oh, my house matters because it's on fire. And the other one said, well, hang on, all houses matter. And the point being, you might be able to tell where this is going. And so when the fire brigade then turned up with the hose and started putting out the fire, i.e. focusing on the house right now that needed the focus, and the other person was saying, well, hang on, all houses matter. But their house didn't need a fire putting out because there was no fire. And I thought that was a really good explanation of where this comes from, and how actually by saying, well, no, it's not Black Lives Matter, it's all lives matter, is taking the focus on what is important to focus on right now. And the Black Lives Matter campaign, I think, it can't be sort of doused down. And this is just, again, we're talking, obviously, it's very current, so it's important to talk about this. But what often happens is that because, and by the way, I'm not suggesting you don't understand it, but because we perhaps have limited understanding, of actually the historical difficulties that Black people and people of colour have faced over the years, that we don't. How can we fully appreciate the feelings that surround it? And so I absolutely agree that it should be Black Lives Matter, because there has to be a focus on that part of the population. Now, something you mentioned just then as well. There's a couple of other things I'd like to pick up on, if I may.
Sure.
And one of them was, you said, there was a few black celebrities, and Morgan Freeman said, stop focusing on it. It's setting people up to fail before they even begin. Morgan Freeman is not the black population, right? And neither is any one person. And I think what's important to recognize is, just like you and I are different people, every single black person and person of color is also a different person, and so they will have their own thoughts around it. And I guess our job, and I don't mean our job as white people, but I mean our job as fellow human beings, and is one of the areas actually that links rather nicely into this conversation about where I think businesses should always look to start, is developing deeper levels of understanding. Because what happens is, it's like Pride Month, and, loads of big businesses change their logo, make something all lovely and rainbowy, and, for a month, and that's that. And then, the recent situation has happened in the world, and everybody's hashtagging Black Lives Matter and so on. And what happens is, this is sometimes what is called performative activism. And in other words, we want to be seen to do the right thing because we believe that we are good people. We believe that we certainly don't feel that we're racist, homophobic, or anything along those lines. And so we go all out to demonstrate to the world that we are absolutely not like that. But what actually is becoming very, very clear and apparent is that these kind of demonstrations, if you like, of, logos and so on, can be counterproductive, because if we're trying to say that, we're not a racist company, we everybody matters here, absolutely great. And by the way, the Black Lives campaign doesn't suggest that other lives don't matter. But what it can do is it gets people questioning that, okay, well, what's really going on? So it's all right to say, yes, I advocate, for black people, for gay people, whomever. But actually what's going on systemically within the organisation that is preventing perhaps the acceleration of people of colour, black people, people from different cohorts of society. What other things deeper within the organisation, far away from a social media hashtag? And I think those are the things to consider. You also mentioned, and I'm sorry, I'm quite passionate about this, you can probably tell, but I hope you realise it's kind of relevant to your audience as well. And I think that One of the things you mentioned there was, tall men as business leaders, and if your son was born short, which I think most children are born short, but anyway,
you know what I mean there, didn't you?
As a 5'2" woman, I'm good. I empathise with the short side of things. But you mentioned there, that if you started saying to your son, mate, it's not going to happen for you, whatever, then does that limit them? Absolutely, of course it does. And language is also one of my passions, and I think that it goes down very, very, it aligns very beautifully with the whole diversity and inclusion theme, really, because, the language that we have going on, certainly within our own minds, and this is that judgment piece that you mentioned, and how quickly we make those judgments and categorizations of people and things, but also the language that we outwardly use. And that might be language that potentially, yes, could limit somebody and actually almost put barriers in their way through suggesting that they're going to have to work harder, or alternatively could really offend somebody when actually it was only meant as banter. And I think this is the thing that we have to be very mindful of in organisations, because I've had it myself in the workplace where somebody sort of said something and I've said, whoa, hang on a minute, and they've said, just a bit of banter. And of course, it's often assumed if you don't go along with said banter, then you're a bit of a stick in the mud, killjoy, whatever. But actually, those are examples of systemic issues that can be it can exclude individuals and
Yes.
change their experience of the working world.
I
Um,
I think also, I think that there is a difference between the way that men as a group will typically interact and women as a group. And I think sometimes when there's a crossover, that can be difficult. I agree with you
Absolutely.
totally. It's about understanding
Hmm.
because a group of men together, typically they will sort of get on, but they sort of release tension by this
Hmm.
sort of Mickey taking and sort of rough play, verbally and physically sometimes, a sports team.
Hmm.
Whereas women will be less likely to that, but they will fall out. And sometimes I don't think they necessarily have that release. Men sort of do it, I think, and I'm no expert on that, as a sort of a mean of a release. They have a bit of a Mickey take, banter backwards and forwards, and they
Yeah.
move on. And I think when they come into the environment with women, women perhaps they don't quite like that as much. Some women, it's not, it's there does seem to me, from my experience anyway, a little bit of a difference there.
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say, and this is not a personal therapy session, Mark, but think about where that all just came from. It came from your own experience.
Oh, sure.
It came from your unique map of the world,
Yep.
and potentially it came from the social circles that you yourself have, and isn't that all really that we can work from? And,
Sure.
You're right. Of course, there are certain things biologically different again from men and women. But I think that, yes, the understanding has to be the key. I mean, I've worked in groups. I've been in groups of women where actually, yeah, there's a whole lot of banter and the kind of thing that you talk about in your male groups. And I've also worked with groups of men who've been quite, and I don't like the term because it's quite gender specific, but bitchy, which is often referred to as a female term. But, I've worked in groups of men that have kind of portrayed those characteristics.
Sure.
And so, it is a whole spectrum. It's not something that you and I can kind of resolve in half an hour on a conversation like this. But I think that the more we can positively challenge the fact that, just because my map of the world says this doesn't necessarily mean it's the right or only map of the world. And so, and I do think, despite all of what I've said, I do think that businesses are making some great headway in this area. I really do. I think that because I don't know if I can share with you really, but I look at inclusion as a bit of a dial, right? So we often use the term, move the dial and whatever. And I think there's various stages of this dial, and I believe that really the first step has to be honestly reflecting on where you sit on that dial at any given moment in time, and seeking feedback, maybe collaborating to recognize that, because that's what any organization I think would do in any other kind of strategy, is to reflect on, okay, so where are we now? Where do we want to be? And then how do we bridge that gap, right? In simple terms. And so I think when we think about inclusion, you may have on one side of the inclusion dial, if you like, what I would refer to as ambivalence. And so, that's kind of that's one of those things we'll look at one day. It's perhaps we don't realize anything's really broken, so we don't look to fix it. And that can be, I guess, a product of circumstance, time frames, deadlines, other priorities that sort of take hold. And then you have the next sort of step around, which I would refer to as compliance, really. So that's maybe where you change your logo to a rainbow, or you'd get involved in Black Lives Matter in terms of the hashtag, and you'd make sure that in your organisation you did as much as you could to prevent any kind of lawsuits, I suppose. So you're making sure that you're adhering to the bare minimums that are required from diversity and inclusion from a discrimination and legal side of things. And we then and as the dial starts to shift a little bit, you get to this perhaps place of discordance where I would call it discordance. So it's a little bit erratic. So you may have pockets across the organisation where there are teams that are highly diverse, but they're also highly inclusive. So they really take the time to educate themselves and one another about what they need, what they value, what's important to them, in order that they can perform to their best. And surely that's what we as leaders look to do, is to get the best out of every person. But these are sort of siloed and they're pocketed. So across the organisation as a whole, you might find that perhaps there are pockets of grievances that are coming through, or pockets in your organisation where there's quite a high turnover of staff, pockets in the organisation whereby the customer relationship is less strong than in others. And of course, not forgetting the fact that your customer base will be as diverse as your internal staff member base, if you like. Yes. And then you then have to really, well, I say have to, you don't have to do anything in life, but you would benefit as an organisation to look at taking steps to get round to what I call embedded inclusion. So that's really the point where everybody is focusing on not so much avoiding discrimination, but instead by demonstrating positive inclusive behaviours, behaviours that you would demonstrate every day, really, such as, educating yourself, acknowledging what's going on around you, observing the interactions with people, but doing that with a slightly different pair of glasses on that allow you to look at, okay, what influence in these relationships is diversity of thinking, culture, etc., having in this sort of collaboration and this communication, which is, I guess, where we were going in the first place. And so, it doesn't happen overnight. But I think my belief really is that when we all take small steps, and I think it was Simon Sinek, who's a wonderful orator, who says, when we all do a little, the world can change a lot. And I really believe that. And that has to have leaders, at very least, open to those challenges of their own thinking. And I guess then, just to try it, just to notice what happens when you actively take time to communicate and collaborate with somebody that's distinctly different to yourself, and obviously if you have somebody like that in your network, and that can be a part of the problem, but if you do, or you can collaborate with people that are different to yourself, that's really, really educating. And of course, then being committed to taking some small steps forward.
I think
I've gone on. I'm passionate, but
no, that's great. We want passionate people on here. We don't want people who sound that they're bored by the subject. It doesn't really work.
Absolutely,
It's only one step up from the mime artist, really, isn't it? Key to that, I think, what you were saying was communication and diversity.
Yeah.
But I think I understand that, and I think communication. I'm doing a podcast. I mean, communication, I suppose, should be key.
Pretty important, yeah.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And I think that there shouldn't be areas that we can't discuss. I think that sometimes there is a polarization of views to an extent that a lot of people on the middle ground can sometimes want to keep their head down and not discuss because they think, oh, this could get really serious and people are going to get annoyed. And I think that's bad. I think that we should be able to communicate, because through communication we will make progress. But I don't think it's always possible to have diversity. And what I mean by that is that I think, for instance, I'll give you a couple of examples. I think in a software company, for instance, if you've got a software development team working very closely together, you will get some diversity, but you'll also get a lot of conformity. You will get
Yeah.
a particular type of people with a particular set of skills, because it's a tough, very specialized job, and those people will naturally work together. I can think of another example outside of the business world, and this was really interesting. I met with a chap who started an organisation called Gangs United
Okay.
in North London. He had been a black gang member himself for
Hmm.
many, many years, quite notorious actually. He had
Okay.
sort of suddenly seen the light, broken away, and decided to do something about it. And he started this association called Gangs United, and he brought together, well, actually, he persuaded gang members to come out of their various gangs in that small part of North London, which did have a lot of trouble with gang fights and gang rivalry. There were people being killed. There was lots with guns. He would persuade people to come away from those gangs,
Yeah.
to come together, and he would do things. He would get them to play football, and he would bring them together, and he would communicate. Now, I went along and I met them a couple of times, and on one occasion he gave a talk about, which I thought was fantastic, which was about, set your lives and really set the objective that when you've gone, you leave a legacy. And I thought he was lifting their heads.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was standing there as the only white person in the room. We were all male, but they were all black. Now, I wasn't expecting to see lots of women in there, because the majority of these gangs are the black men.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, this is not the time for me to start talking about sexism,
Yeah.
because it's just not appropriate here. There was no other white faces, and all I spoke about really was, you can do anything you want to. If you're going to work hard enough, if you set yourself the goals, you can go out and you can achieve pretty well anything. Just go for it, guys. That was the sort of the emphasis of it. But in those sort of circumstances, trying to get diversity, it's like looking at a track, an athletics team. I suppose there is going to be a certain amount of diversity, but there's also going to be some conformity as well.
Yeah, sure. And, I think that, there would be, to take your first point, you talked about in a software company, you might have software development team, and there's a unique set of skills and so on and so forth. And arguably, there may be a certain processing mentality that people that are naturally drawn to those types of roles will possess, that because they are perhaps creatives, they are perhaps analytical or analytically minded and so on. What I think is interesting there is that, and there's a couple of points. The first would be that there are, it's proven that in STEM subjects, women actually female students outperform male students in STEM subjects, and yet such a small percentage of them go into those professions on the back of these great qualifications. And this, I think, is very interesting, because it tells me that there is something stopping them taking that strength that they clearly have demonstrated through their educational results,
Yes.
and moving that forward into their career. And so it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, I think, here, is that, when we say, yes, there's a unique set of skills, yeah, absolutely. And, there's no point, I can't say, well, come on, give me an opportunity as being a brain surgeon. You have to have the skill, of course.
Yes.
But what often happens, and we know this, is that we recruit and hire for, we look for culture fit, don't we? We look for, people that are going to fit in the culture. But notice that, are we getting that wrong? Many people would argue, yes, we are, because when we're looking for culture fit, we're saying we want the same again, the same again, the same again. Whereas actually, if we start looking more at culture build, so we start to look at people that possess complementary qualities, notwithstanding the qualifications, that's different, but the complementary qualities that can actually stretch an existing team to think differently, because actually that is where the innovation and creativity will develop, will enhance, and it takes somebody to come in and say, right, I've got some different ideas, and to be able to, and to be safe. And this is, again, another issue of leadership around psychological safety and providing the environment where people can speak up without fear that, and it sometimes takes the leaders themselves to be vulnerable first, to say, look, I don't have all the answers and I've made some mistakes on this journey, but I want to learn and I want to develop for the good of us all. And so this is the thing. It's those small steps to start thinking about, okay, we have some great people in our team. Yeah, tick. We have some real creative thinkers. Great, tick. And I am not suggesting we start looking at hiring and so on in a tokenistic way. Nobody wants tokenism.
No.
What we want is true diversity and inclusion. So, for somebody that has the same qualifications that are required, but actually just bring a slightly different level of thinking, rather than wondering, oh, that could really upset the apple cart, as we would say, and looking at that as a negative, but maybe think about it in a different way to say, well, hang on, maybe upsetting the apple cart is how we're going to get from where we are now to that next level. And we'll do that quicker and perhaps more effectively. As you mentioned before, Mark, about, leaders, they're expected to make decisions quickly. They are, but it needs to be a good decision, right? Ideally,
absolutely. Sure.
To move forward. And sometimes I often say to people that I work with, sometimes it's good to take a step back in order to move forward. And I think we almost have to challenge ourselves not to get wrapped up in the stereotypical expectations that the world has of us to make very, very quick decisions, but instead to really take some reflection time and think, well, yes, I want to make a decision reasonably quickly, but I also want to make a very well-balanced decision based on the facts. And we don't always know what we don't know. And so by seeking out diversity of thinking, that's going to help us see things that perhaps we hadn't seen before. And I guess, in terms of the gang member stuff, the Gangs United, it's a lovely story, by the way. And I hasten to add, lots of people will be thinking, well, yeah, gang members, black guys, etc. I believe that much of that comes from the systemic racism that has been experienced by, these former children into adulthood, that has kind of led them down these paths because for various reasons. I'm not excusing gang mentalities and violence and all that sort of thing, but I try to understand what might lead somebody there. Nobody's born bad, right?
No.
So what's led them there? And I think it's lovely that this person sort of stepped up to change that status quo.
And he made a difference because of it. I mean,
Yeah.
there were two lads there that had sort of broken away from what they were seeing typically around them within the community that they lived, and they went to university and they graduated with a degree, and I had quite a long conversation with them afterwards, and really impressive young men. They were eloquent and interested and passionate, and the sort of people that a company would want to employ.
Well, it's amazing.
You'd be leaning in towards them actually, without even knowing where their skills were, because they were socially aware, they were passionate and energized, and interesting to talk to. That sort of person is going to do quite well.
That's it. And it's amazing how much we actually have in common with people that we get to know, when we kind of, we're almost surprised, it's like, wow, actually there's quite, I see some commonality. Yeah. The more people we engage with, the more we'll see that common ground. And, you're just my final point really in relation to this, where you said about leaving a legacy. I think that, what this individual who set up Gangs United has done is he has stepped up He stepped out. He has basically become a role model. And now surely leaders in organizations, they are, whether they know it or not, they're certainly the aspirational figure in an organization often. But, to really be that role model, people, we copy what we see every day, right? What we see, what we hear. So the leadership of an organization is so important for role modeling. And basically, if a leader in an organization can be humble enough to take that time to self-reflect and self-evaluate and start to make small changes, that individual will be amazed. And that might be in their communication, by the way, in the first instance. They'll be amazed how much that starts to come back to them in the responses that they get. And because they're slightly changing the way in which they're communicating, the responses, of course, will slightly change as well. And I love this whole term of leaving a legacy, but I also love the term live your legacy, because we often think that, legacy is something it's far beyond us on this planet, right?
Yes.
And it's what people think about and whatever. But how do people think about you now? I ask people to consider, and I mean really think about you now. What is your legacy right now? And how could you change that just by making a few small tweaks to the way in which you see the world, the people that you engage with, and the way in which you communicate with those around you? Because I think you can make a big difference to the legacy that you have right now.
Some great points there. I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's about, I suppose, not being a bystander in life and letting life happen to you. Take action now in the direction that you want to go. It's not just about what you leave behind after you've gone. It's about having an effect now, which is a great message.
I mean, the whole, and I'll say, final thing, because we perhaps need to wrap up now. I'm not sure, but, but in terms of the Black Lives Matter campaign and what's happened there, big part of the message there is it's no longer enough to say I'm not racist, but actually we have to start becoming anti-racist in our behaviours. And there's some brilliant resources, books and so on that we can read. And I think that applies across all of the isms, if you like, across society, that we can think about. It's not enough perhaps to say, no, I'm not racist, or I'm not homophobic, or I don't have anything against women or people with disabilities, etc., but instead to say, okay, how can I actively include these? How can I proactively include and demonstrate anti this rather than just saying, oh no, I don't see colour, I don't see difference, which I hear a lot as well.
So maybe the message for this whole podcast is about not so much sort of shouting about it and making posts on social media, but just to go and take an action. Maybe just take an action quietly. I mean, this guy from Games United, he was doing it very quietly, and I just stumbled upon him really by accident. But one final story to make you think is on one occasion he heard about two gangs that were coming together, and there was going to be a big fight, which he'd been told about, and he knew that there were guns involved, and he found out who it was, and he went round to their homes and took the guns away from them. And that's pretty inspiring. That's somebody really taking action. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can't knock him for doing that.
Absolutely, and as you say, I have no problem with, and I don't suppose many people would have any problem with actually making public statements, and yes, changing logos, using hashtags, but I would just say not that in isolation. Don't think that solves the problem. And as you say, being able to be courageous and vulnerable, they go hand in hand, and to take some action, no matter how small, from little acorns and all that. So I believe that's the way forward.
Well, brilliant talk today. Thank you very much, Jackie.
Thank you, Mark.
If somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, my website is www.jackiehandy.com. So my company is Runway Global Limited, but my website's under my name because people seem to know me easier in relation to that. So that's the best way. My email address is simply hello@jackiehandy.com. Very happy to sort of have a conversation. And in fact, if I could just give a teeny plug, I'm just printing out some little booklets which I've called the Little Book of Belonging, which sounds lovely and fluffy, doesn't it, and very, very female, but actually there's stereotypically, but it's designed as a little desktop flip book, to be honest, and all that has within it is it's got some quotes and motivational quotes and so on, but it's also got reflective questions within it, just to have people start to think differently about how they can become a bit more inclusive and really promote belonging and belonging cultures into their world. So that'll be on my website shortly for anybody that would like to purchase one for their own desk. There we go. That's my plug.
That's fine. And what a super way to finish. You've actually taken action. And the Little Book of Belonging. Nice title. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And thank you for all of you listening. A little bit longer podcast today, but that's good. That means that we were really engrossed in the conversation, which is always a good sign. As always, please give feedback, share, like, and come back and tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. Always willing to listen. So until next time, keep safe, keep focused, and good luck. Thank you very much.